Welcome back, everybody. I'm Rustin.
I'm Mike Basil.
I'm Tammy Gomez.
And we are so glad that you are joining us on this Lenten journey of developing 10 practices to grow our faith during harder times of life. We are on Friday, and we're jumping to the gift of shared suffering in Michelle's book. She says it's easy to share suffering. It's easy to share in the suffering of those who are close to us. But what about that of individuals, communities, and nations that are not our own? I think this is super important, right? Because we live in Walnut Creek area, right? We live in a privileged space. And that does not mean that we don't each experience our own suffering and have our own laments. I think one of the risks is, well, their laments are so much worse than mine, I can't express my laments. That's also bad. We don't want to engage in that. All laments matter to God. But I think often in our bubbles, we can miss the practice of sharing in someone else's suffering.
Yeah, it's easy to be in our bubble and just close the door, not acknowledge.
Yeah. I mean, from my own experience, right, of 9/11, living in Boston, where all the planes took off from, our city was grieved in a way that was actually, I don't mean bigger, or it was just a deeper grief. Like, everybody knew somebody on a plane. Like, I lost a very dear friend in one of the planes, and I didn't know anybody in Boston that wasn't true, because the planes left our city. And so there was a space of shared grief for a moment. And then all of a sudden, people forget, right? We heal, we do these things, and that's great, right? Yeah. But like, I still can't be online on 9/11 because the trauma, the videos that get posted, cause for me, right? So what does it mean for us to share in suffering of someone else?
Absolutely. I was thinking back to day 3 in this book, where it says lament is what happens when people ask why and don't get an answer. And there's one thing to be lamenting on your own and asking why and not getting an answer, but that's the corporate why you're speaking of in Boston, when it was a whole group of you just saying, why did this happen? And you're in that shared space together. And that's a corporate wailing. Lament isn't a quiet internal thing. It's being in sorrow together.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the Hebrew text, right, like when they practice lament, they would like put on itchy clothes and rub ashes all over themselves. Absolutely, yeah. And it was like this kind of, many spiritual practices in those days were theater, right? They were physical theater of, man, like wiping myself and covering myself in ash reminds me of the finality of things, and the finality of, even if I'm not experiencing this moment, what does it look like for me to put it on, right? So I was thinking about, again, when I was in Minneapolis and the murder of George Floyd, like, I was standing in front of the police station as it went in flames, and the connection to that, and then walking into spaces where people didn't understand the grief of our city and the lament of our city, actually was pretty painful. So I think there's a piece, I think this about the API, Asian Pacific Islanders, violence that's been happening in San Francisco and in the Bay Area and all over the kind of country. And I'm not an Asian Pacific Islander, obviously. So what does it mean for me to connect to their corporate suffering as a practice? Like, to put off political sides of that and to say, like, no, it matters. If somebody else is hurting, I have to come alongside them in that.
And how do you do that in a way that is authentic and real? Because I think about how right now some of the trends are, when someone's going through suffering, right, you'll have other YouTube, TikTok stars, voice this opinion, put up a video and shared, consolation, but there's really no actual change, right? Is that enough? Is that, I don't know. Like, I'm wrestling with this idea of shared suffering. How do we truly share in one another's sufferings and bear, each other's burdens in love, right?
And I personally don't think that stuff means anything.
Yeah.
I think it's virtue signaling generally, which, again, no judgment. We're all doing the best we can. But like, I think with, like, specifically like API violence, what does it look like for us to listen to our Asian and Pacific Island community members, to ask those in our church who are from that space and say, can you talk to me about what you're feeling? Like the fear you have, what your life experience is, and just listen and let them know that you're there with them. Suffering literally means to have compassion, means to suffer alongside, right?
Yeah. And I think that's what's the difference is instead of just, hopping into an issue and just saying, I understand or I feel you, right? It's to really suffer alongside someone. So how do we go to a place and actually feel and experience some of these, feelings that you experienced during 9/11? How do we truly relate? George Floyd, we're on the other side of the country where this is happening, and there's marches and protests here. And, are we hopping in line to join those protests, or are we just kind of sitting back in our couches making judgments, with Asian Pacific Islanders? Are we getting out to our community? I've seen groups that have literally gone into San Francisco, stood at corners and helped people cross the street, or help people, kept an eye on people, like watchdogs, in order to kind of feel that shared suffering. So how do we, as a community, really do this shared suffering, this side of lament well?
And I do, as you say that too, I think about the power of listening as we're acting, right? Because I think often communities in suffering are looking for their brothers and sisters who are different than them and saying, where are you?
Yep. It is about fixing it, and it's not about the action immediately. It's about the listening and showing the love, the empathy, the compassion, being upset in the moment, and then working together towards change.
Yeah. And I think listening to what the change they want is, right? Yeah. I think often as a white male, I feel like I know everybody's needs and can just meet them automatically without having to ask anybody anything, which is not helpful. And so what does it mean for us to listen well and then to act in a way that lifts up how the communities that are different than us want us to lift up?
That's good.
Some of the best things we can do is give other people our platforms, give people space to have these conversations, to bring them to the forefront. And so I really do think it is about listening first. That doesn't denote don't act, but listen with. There's a with piece of this that I think really matters, that isn't about me posting anything, but about being with. So our practice for today is, how can you share in another's suffering? Spend some time thinking through groups in our neighborhood or city or area that are experiencing suffering. And then pray, Father, you see the suffering of those around me more clearly than I do. Open my eyes to see what I may have missed. Move my heart with what moves yours. Then after a few moments of listening, we encourage you to write down whatever God brings to mind and then commit to action. Thanks for joining us today.